Hello, everyone. Welcome back. After three incredible women sharing in different levels, talking about adolescence, talking about impression versus expression, and talking about meeting great expectations, we're now going to shift gears and welcome Fionn back, our well-being head, and is going to talk about creating certainty in uncertain times. Now, that's a bit of an oxymoron, but we'll try and understand where Mr. Fionn is coming from, because certainty, as we all know, is beyond a dream and can create all kinds of frustration if we hold on to and expect. So welcome, Fionn. Welcome back. Let's have some fun, and let's hear, first of all, why this title? What does it even mean?
Thanks, Faisal. It's good to be back. Yeah, so I mean, 2020 has been a year for pretty much everyone that I know that has been full of uncertainty, and it's been a wild ride. I don't know anyone who was expecting this to come along, and you know, we've all had to deal with it. And so in the meantime, you know, when we're running businesses and we're trying to figure out our lives and we're trying to figure out our plans for next year or the next decade, or, you know, for the rest of our lives, or planning out for the next generation, for our kids or their grandchildren, how do we plan when we don't know what the future is going to look like? And that's part of what I wanted to share a bit about today, and, you know, to have a dialogue with you about, you know, as someone who, you know, runs a lot of different operations, and kind of, you know, co-creating this moment today and sort of figuring it out together, not coming in knowing what the answer is, but more sort of like okay, well, this is an interesting time that we're living in right now. It's unprecedented in so many ways. What do we do when times are like this?
Well, it was interesting. It's interesting you say that. So when COVID happened, I spoke to many families that we care for, and I said, this is what we've been preparing for. And they're like, what? Are you kidding me? How could you have dreamt that this was going to happen? So it's not about COVID itself. It's the unexpected. It's the curveball beyond our imagination. It's the quote unquote, the black swan, right? Now, again, is it a black swan? You know, our friend Bill Gates warned us 10 years ago of something like this, right? So is it really a black swan, or is it us just being in denial that this could never happen and could not impact us at this level? So it's really about preparing for the unexpected. And how do you do that? Right? I think let's talk about agility. Let's talk about adaptability. Let's talk about flow. Let's talk about the different forms of water, right? That it takes, and how, depending on the condition, like right now I'm in Switzerland and it's snowing. Thank God for Switzerland because of the ski season, but you know, and so how do you change, whether you're driving a car, whether you're going for a walk? Or I was walking with somebody who's on the call today, and I was saying to her that stomp as you walk for safety. And that obviously you wouldn't tell a kid, because if that's like, you know, huffing and puffing. But when you're in a space where it could be a little slippery, the last thing you want is to, you know, slip and land on your behind. So let's go step by step. So what does it mean to be, like, what are the tools or strategies that you would come through with for preparing for the unexpected, so that we could kind of have that agility and adaptability as we go?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, I mean, the first place I'd like to start with this is kind of just looking at where we are in this point in history right now. I mean, you know, we can call them black swans or gray swans or white swans or whatever we want to call them, but I mean, 2020 has been quite a year, whether it was the fires in Australia or COVID or Black Lives Matter. There've been a lot of, or, you know, the whole election in the US, there've been a lot of very significant events that have happened this year. And, you know, to a certain extent, you know, for a lot of people that might have seemed overwhelming. It might have felt like, oh my God, what's happening? Is the world burning down around us? You know, and, you know, to a certain extent, there might be some truth to that. You know, there is a lot of change happening. And, you know, we could even say that maybe there's more change happening now than there ever has been in the history of humankind. Right, like we're on an exponential trend. You know, whether we look at the acceleration of technology, we look at globalization, we look at the way that things are shifting and moving. There's so many things happening so fast now, and we have this information overload. Right, like we have social media coming at it from every side. It's hard to tell what's real news, what's fake news. how do we actually figure out what to do in our modern lives anymore? And so that's kind of one of the places that I like to start to think about this, is sort of taking a bit of a bigger picture view, because it's easy to get lost in the details, right? Of, well, is this person right, or is that person right, or is this narrative true, or is that narrative true? And we can get very much lost up in the stories of, who's right or who's wrong, or, whether it's a conspiracy theory or whether it's the truth, or, and to be honest, these days, in every conspiracy theory is a little bit of truth, right? And in everything that the mainstream thinks, well, there's a lot wrong, right? And so it's about trying to figure out, well, what is actually going on? And so one of the ways that I like to help people orient this, rather than getting overwhelmed by the whole picture, is to say, well, what are the things that we do know, right? What are the things that are clear? Okay, I wake up every morning. All right, so far that's been true, right? My whole life, I've been able to wake up every morning, except for maybe those mornings where, I played a little bit too hard last night, and I, maybe woke up in the afternoon or the evening if it was a really hard night. But like, there's certain things that, okay, I breathe every day, right? Okay, so I can rely on my breath. That's one of the sort of the core key pieces, is anytime that the world seems like it's falling apart, if I can just come back to my breath, that's always there. My heartbeat, as long as I'm alive, my heartbeat is always there. And so just having some of those pieces that we can come back to can help orient ourselves into the present. And then once we're in the present, now we can start to make, wiser decisions. Because if we're sitting in the future, we're sitting in the past, or we're sitting in, our thoughts or our stories or whatever might be going on, we can go down those paths forever and never come to any certainty about what's true or what's right or what's wrong. But if we come back to the present, if we come back to ourselves, if we come back to our center, and we get into alignment, now we can start to make a bit of sense of what's happening around us, right? There's certain things, okay, this table feels pretty solid in front of me, right? Like, okay, I'm here with you right now, and in real time, like, I see you nodding your head, and okay, there's some sort of feedback coming back to me now. All right, so I'm in this room right now. There's certain things, I can feel the temperature of the air. I can orient myself to this reality, right? I can go off in my head and make all sorts of stories about what might be happening in the rest of the world, right? And some of it may be true, a lot of it might not be, right? But what I do know is I'm here right now in this present moment, and what can I do from this place? How can I act from this place? And if I can do that, if I can create a habit of bringing myself back into the present, I don't know if I'd call that certainty, right? Because it's a spectrum, right? Like, there's things that I'm very uncertain about, and there's things that I'm more certain about, right? But the things that are right here and right now, I can be more certain about. And so if I can stay in a place where things are more solid, things are more clear, where I have more stability, then it's like standing on a strong, solid foundation, right? You're standing on a strong, solid foundation. Now I can act, right? Now I can move, and I can move with confidence, because I know that there are things that I have. And so those are some of the basic techniques that I often help my coaching clients with. If they're starting to feel overwhelmed or lost or confused or stressed out or frustrated, it's like, let's take a moment. What do we know to be true, right? Okay, you wake up every morning, okay, you've got the sunshine comes up every day, right? Unless you live up way north, like Norway or somewhere like that, right? Like, you're gonna have certain things that you can orient yourself towards in your daily life. Like, I wake up and my kids are there beside me every morning. Okay, good. I can look at a smile on their face, and the whole world might be burning down, but once I see my little 5-year-old smile, everything is okay, right? And so finding those little small pieces of daily life that we can anchor to, that we can find a sense of stability, a sense of reliability, a sense of meaning, then from those places we can start to build out and look at, okay, now how can I make a greater impact? Not just deal with the reality around me, not just survive in this world, but now how do I have some sort of an influence? From this solid foundation, now I can start to shape my reality around me. Now I can start to, whether it's build businesses or, influence other people, or maybe, at the highest levels, influence global, geopolitics or global business. And so that's one of the basic things is, we can get into those big picture things, but it can be easy to get lost. But if we can operate in those big pictures from a place of presence, now we can make a real difference.
Okay, that's amazing. So you're grounding. So now I'm breathing. I'm centered, I'm grounded, I'm here, I feel my environment, I feel my loved ones, I feel the space that I'm in, right? I'm now present. Okay, now I'm ready to quote unquote engage. Right? Now, the person in front of me or the environment around me may or may not be in that energy space, right? They could be in a very different space. They could have just watched the news. They could have reacted, right? Again, it's the meaning we give to everything that happens, right? So you're coming back to that center space, but the people around you may not be from that space. So now, what do you do? Excuse me. What do you do from that space? Do you slow down? Do you speak softer? What would be the next step?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of contextual variables in here in this kind of a question, like what do we do? And you know, one of the beautiful things about getting into presence is that it tends to, now not always, but it tends to bring a certain form of clarity where we're in that moment, in that space. If we're operating from presence, if we're operating from alignment, from centeredness, there's kind of like this, it's almost like an automatic sense of, I feel clear about what I need to do. And, you know, for those of you out there who are watching who meditate, you've probably felt this a number of times, right? When you finish your meditation, suddenly it's like, boom, that thing that I've been worried about or thinking about for weeks or months, suddenly I just get it, right? And I know exactly what I need to do. And so it's the same kind of thing that we're talking about here, except you don't have to do like a deep, you know, half an hour long meditation to get there. It's about saying, how can I keep reorienting myself to that consistently throughout my day, every day? And if I can do that, I'm operating from a place, again, not 100% certainty, but more certainty and more clarity. And so in that situation, you know, it might be like you said, that it's about, okay, I'm noticing that everyone around me is freaking out, right? They're getting really worked up. Maybe they've been watching too much CNN, right? Or maybe they've been watching too much fake news on social media, right? And they're getting all caught up in the memes of how crazy the world seems to be right now. And how can we accept that that's the reality for them? That's how they seem to be experiencing their reality. And you know, from a place of clarity, you know, it can seem like, you know, why are they doing that? Like, why are they getting all worked up or whatever? And we might want to try and change people. We might want to try and make sure that they're not feeling like that. And some people are open to that, and some people aren't, right? Some people aren't there yet, right? It's, you know, one of the metaphors that I like to use is, you know, as human beings, we operate at different stages of awareness, right? We have different capacities to be able to be aware of different things, right? I look at my, you know, 5-year-old, there's certain things that he's aware of, right? He's aware of, you know, what toys he's going to play with, and he's aware of what food that he likes, right? He's not aware of global dynamics and geopolitics and global business, right? Like, it's just not on his radar. And so having an understanding of what's on that human being, that person's radar, what are they actually aware of? And instead of me trying to pull them to whatever level that I think that I am at, how can I sit at their level? And, you know, with my 5-year-old, if the world's falling apart, maybe the best thing for me to do is play games with him, right? And then he feels that everything is okay, right? And instead of me trying to explain to him, you know, how things aren't falling apart, or, you know, how the world isn't so terrible. It's like, well, maybe if I just show him that I'm feeling okay enough to play with him, then he'll feel okay too. And then he'll feel like, you know, the world is a safe place. And, you know, specifically if we talk about children, those are the kinds of healthy mindsets, the kind of healthy worldviews that, you know, create healthy adults so that we can operate out here in the world. So yeah, I would say that, you know, in response to your question, it depends on the context. It depends on, you know, who's around me, what are their capacities, how much involvement, you know, is required of me, how much am I responsible for the situation? Sometimes things might be falling apart, and actually it's not really my role to take care of any of that, right? It's not really my responsibility. Now, I might offer support, right? And if people want to take it, great. But it may also be that, you know, they don't necessarily want my support, even though it might seem like they need it, right? Maybe that's not something that they're actually even interested in. And can I be okay with letting them be in that space, right? Can I accept that that's the reality that they're living in, and not judge, say, oh, they should be thinking a different way, or they should be feeling a different way? Can I just be okay with, where they are? And if they ask me for support, then, I can give willingly if that's something that I have either the capacity or the energy or the willingness to do. So yeah, if we can come back to that place of presence, a lot of it becomes clear. And then based on the context that we're in, we can sort of make our decisions from there. I don't know if that sort of,
No, that's, yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about, that there's nothing really to do. It kind of just starts to, you just have that clarity and that knowing, right? Over time, as you begin to experience that state of being. The other element that you're speaking to is to meet others where they are, whether it's your child, whether it's another. But at the same time with your child, it's okay, I wouldn't mind getting absorbed in his world. But when it's another person who's kind of, doing that wonderful spiral, I would prefer not to be absorbed by that world. But the question is meeting them where they are without imposing, as you said, or judging, right? Or expecting them to change or to be in your space, right? So I remember one of my coaches used to say to me, he said, when you get into the house, park your Ferrari at the door, and the Ferrari wasn't a literal car, just a speed, and take out your tricycle and meet your children where they are, because they're not interested to be driving that fast. They just want to live moment by moment by moment. So it was a metaphor of the Ferrari versus the tricycle. Not that the kids are slow, they're very faster than a Ferrari, right? They're probably more of a Bugatti, but anyways, we won't go into the car thing. So, but the thing is, it's always challenging, between what somebody needs and what somebody wants, right? And getting that permission. But then there's a fine line of when do you nudge and when do you not nudge, right? Because at moment in time, sometimes nudging is the right thing to do in that moment in time, right? And you may cross the line and get pushback, right? But if you do nothing, that might not be of service to the other individual or to the situation at hand. So it's a slippery slope. I know I'm putting you into a nice mucky situation, but it's fun.
It's a really fine line, and I can't think of any overarching statement that sort of, will encompass every situation. But, there's a few principles, I guess, that I would say that I personally try to adhere to when it comes to deciding whether or not to give that nudge. Now, on one end of the spectrum, there's the Zen master who's going to whip you over the head with a cane because you need a slap in the face right now, right? And sometimes that's exactly what we need, right? But it's you got to be careful about that, right? Because that applied in the wrong situation can cause trauma, right? And if you're causing trauma, that creates more problems later on in their life, and that maybe gets passed on generationally and all sorts of things. So we have to be very careful with that kind of an approach. And from the people who I know who seem to be able to do that well, it doesn't come from a place of, okay, this is my strategy now, I'm going to whip them and make sure that they wake up. It comes almost from a place of, I didn't plan this. It's just right now, here in this moment, I'm going to deliver a message to you. And that message is often more like a mirror. It's like you're throwing a whole lot of energy at me right now. Let me just throw a little bit of that back at you and see, so that you see what it feels like. Like, not in form of revenge, not in the form of like judging you for doing that, but just feel a little bit of that energy and see what that feels like, so that you're seeing yourself in the mirror. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, is the Zen sort of Buddhist master. On the other edge of the spectrum, and this is kind of, I tend to lean more on this direction, is having a really, really gentle approach and doing our best not to project anything on the other person, right? Now we hear, people talking about projection, and it's one of the areas where I'm very, very specific in the way that I use this word. And, as human beings, we project on everything, right? It's something that we learn how to do as children, right? We see a ball, and we call that ball, right? So now I'm projecting on this object, on this physical object, in my head what this thing is, because I have a relationship to other things that are like that, right? Now the problem is, with physical objects, that's usually not such a big idea, big problem, because a table doesn't really care if I call it a table, right? But now, wait a minute, because if I start finding assholes out there and I start labeling people as assholes, now I don't actually know the whole person, but depending on a behavior that they're doing and other behaviors that I've seen from other people that I would have labeled in that way, now I start, using that kind of language. But now the problem is, if that's language that actually comes out my mouth now, right? And, I say something like that to someone, a lot of people might just sort of, throw that back at you and say like, what's wrong with you for saying like something like that, right? But a lot of people, and especially we need to be very careful with children here, they will take that in and they will take that projection, they will introject it, and it will become truth for them. It becomes a part of their new identity. And so this is why we need to be particularly careful with children and the kind of language that we use with them, because the words that we use, particularly as parents, as caregivers, who they put a lot of importance in our words, they take those words in and they become their identity, right? It becomes the truth of who they think they are. It develops their ego, right? We often talk about the ego as if it's a bad thing, right? Oh, I have too much ego here, too much ego there. The ego is necessary, right? The ego is a necessary part of growing up. All human beings, have an ego. Even those out there who look like enlightened people, right? They all have egos. The only thing is the people who tend to be more sort of, at one with the world are those who've begun to let go of their ego, or they're detached from it more to an extent than, a lot of people hold on very tightly to their ego, right? Or, this is the story, this is who I am, right? This is the way that I do things, right? And that ego that's developed, when I'm talking about being more gentle, on the gentle end of the spectrum is, if people are clinging very tightly to their ego, like, how can I be gentle with that? Because that's their reality, that's the truth for them. And so when I talk about projections and how we can actually, speak, projections don't only come in the form of speech, but it's the easiest way to understand it when we use language, right? When we speak to someone, if someone says to me, oh, I'm feeling really sad today, and I say, oh, wow, like you seem like you're depressed, I've just projected on that person, because they didn't tell me they were depressed. They told me they were sad, right? And now I've taken their interpretation of what they mean as sad, and I think they said, or they meant they were depressed, but they didn't say that. Now it may turn out that, that's more or less close to their version of reality, but it may turn out that actually that wasn't even on their radar at all in the first place. And now that they've told me they're sad, and I've dropped depressed on top of that. Depression and sadness are two very different things. But now they might start to believe me, right? Where, they're thinking, am I depressed? Wow, I didn't even think about that. Maybe I am depressed. Actually, yeah, I've been feeling very sad for a long time. I'm starting to feel quite depressed. And now they start to introject. They start to take in my projection, the thing that I was, trying to make sense of their reality, and incorrectly. They take it in and it becomes a part of their reality. And now suddenly I've influenced that person to become more depressed than they were when they started conversing with me. And so this is one of the things that I, try my best to be very, very careful with when I'm communicating with people, is to use their language, right, when they're speaking, right? And it's very, very easy to make this mistake, and it's something that, we all do all the time. Someone says something, we interpret it in our own language, and then we, assume that that's true, right? We take what they tell us, we make meaning of it, we make sense of it, and then we assume it's true. And so one of the techniques, one of the principles that I would say around this topic is check to see if you're interpreting it correctly. Don't assume that you're actually understanding what someone is saying until you check with them, right? So if someone says, oh, I'm feeling really sad, and you might say, oh, like sad, like what kind of sadness, right? Or sad in what way, right? Now you get to understand more, right? And then, they might tell you then, oh yeah, actually I've been feeling depressed for a while. It's like, okay, great. Now I know, I have an understanding, right? But they might say, actually, no, this sadness, it just came on yesterday. And I don't even know, why it's here, you know, and then maybe you can help them explore it a little bit. And so it's, you know, when we're dealing with other human beings, when we're dealing with people, one of those principles is, how can I be very, very careful? How can I be very, very gentle with their version of reality and the attachment that they might have to that? And, you know, whether that's the story that they have of it, you know, i.e. the ego, or whether that's, you know, the worldview that they've developed and the way in which they see the world that they live in, and treating that with respect, treating that with compassion, with care, with love. And if I can operate from that place, then I'm going to do less harm, and I'm going to be able to support them in the ways that they best need support. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you, Feisal. If you know, if you
I mean,
have,
look, I completely
go ahead.
agree. Where one is, you know, I mean, am I speaking to be understood? Am I listening to understand? And we may have that, but again, like you said, you know, checking in to see and rephrasing, using the words they've used, right? So that you have clarity and alignment of what you think you heard, right? What could be possibly what they're trying to share, right? And then one of the, you know, my masters or coaches say, always as you walk in a room or as you walk into a situation, you ask yourself, what would love do now, right? Which is what you're referring to in terms of gentleness, right? And coming from that space of self-love and self-care, but obviously towards another, right? Now, the thing is, as you all know, that many of us were not even taught the element of self-love and self-care, right? I mean, I was completely zero at the game, right? And had to learn the hard way, right? And I sit and work with many leaders today, and just the element of you know, acknowledging what they have accomplished, and even, you know, that's one part, and celebrating is a complete different element, and then staying in that space for longer than 5 seconds before they choose the next mountain. I mean, because they're so fast, they're so good, they're so agile, but at the end of the day, it's affecting their adrenal glands, it's affecting their physiology, because they're not taking that time to acknowledge and celebrate, right? So kind of bringing some other angles to it, but, you know, that gentleness, you know, which I at times don't use, right? And people come off and say, whoa, this is, you know, he's nudging in a very abrasive manner. I mean, you know that we do calls together, and you know, I'm the Zen guy with no training, so it's a complete fiasco, right, as we go. But, you know, but again, you know, so now let's talk about, okay, so we talked about how we show up, and just having that clarity and that knowing, using that, you know, making sure that we're understanding, we're trying to meet the other person where they are, using gentleness, using the word, you know, coming from a space of the heart space, and using the word love. But now we're ending the year, right? This is the last webinar we're going to do for 2020, right? And in preparation for 21, right? What do I do? Like, how do I even, you know, pretend to prepare for what's to come, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the big questions, right? Like, especially when we talk about living from presence, like, great, let's live from presence, but how do I plan for the future? Because we've all got to live through the future. And, you know, if we don't plan, you know, the whole adage, you know, if we don't plan, then, you know, but what's the quote? Failing to plan is planning to fail. Yeah, something like that. And, you know, to a certain extent, that's true. I mean, we don't live in the luxury of, you know, maybe at some points in history where we could just la-di-da into the next year and things will be fine, you know. The level of unpredictability on planet Earth right now, right, where it's like, you know, if we lived a few hundred years ago, next year was going to be pretty much the same as this year, right? Like, you know, maybe we'd have a slightly different weather pattern, so you know, there'd be less crops, you know, growing out of the ground or whatever. And, you know, at the worst of times, there might be a drought, right? But for the most part, you know, last year and this year were relatively the same. In this era, in this time period, last year and this year are incredibly different, right? And the rate of change is speeding up, right? Things are getting more different faster than they ever have before. And so one of the things that we want to think about, or that tends to be useful, you know, when I'm working with people for them to start to think about, is to have a sort of an idea of the potential timeline, right? Like, at what point in your life are you right now? You know, like, how much further do you have more or less to go? Knowing more or less the lifespan of a human being, right? Like, and who knows, you know, anything could happen tomorrow. But more or less, you know, if we look at it, the likelihood, the chances, the more certainty, right? You know, what are the things that we're relatively certain about? And how do we begin to plan for that time period? You know, like, how much time am I around left on planet Earth? How much time around, you know, am I around with, you know, other people who are close to me? You know, some of them might be departing before I am. And how do I, you know, make sure that I'm doing the things that are priority, the things that matter most to me? And there is no one simple answer to that, because different people have different values. And depending on your values, you know, there's different types of choices to make. So often one of the first things that I'll do with people when we start to work together is to sort of look at, what are your core values? What really matters to you? Because we could go off in a direction, you know, helping you grow or build your business, or going into your leadership skills, or going into your relationship, or going into your family or parenting, or all sorts of things. But what is it that you care about? What is it that matters most to you? And let's start there, right? So doing a bit of a kind of a personal exploration with, what are your personal core values? What do you really care about? What's most important to you? So that we tick those priorities off first, right? And we figure out both the short term and the long term for those, right? Like, what is it you want to accomplish in your lifetime, right? Let's get the big picture. Let's get the big rocks in first, right? Let's make sure that you're moving in that direction, right? And then once we've got the bigger things and we know that we're moving in that direction, now let's start to look at some of the smaller ones, right? Some of the things you might like to do over the next few years, right? Some of the sort of the smaller, you know, whether it's accomplishments or ticking things off the bucket list, or, you know, just doing things that, you know, give you a sense of purpose or meaning in your life. And you know, one of the things that we can get very caught up in is creating a plan and then thinking that that plan is going to be true, or that is the reality. Or coming up with, you know, often I'll bring my clients through some sort of a visualization of what they would like their ideal future to look like. And we want to be careful about that, because, you know, it's a wonderful idea to come up with a vision and to, you know, have a plan. And at the same time, how can we make sure that we're not attached to that vision or that plan? How can we, you know, there's a concept, I haven't heard anyone else talk about it, but what I call it is directionality without attachment, right? How can we have a very clear direction of where we want to go, but not be attached to that? Because tomorrow it might turn out totally different. Tomorrow we might realize that that wasn't actually, you know, maybe back then when we decided that that was a good idea, but it turns out that maybe today I've learned something new, or maybe today the world has shifted, or maybe today I've met a new person and that new relationship has changed my priorities, right? And so can I allow myself to let go of that plan, of that vision, for something that is better? And so this is one of the key areas that, you know, I like to emphasize with people, because of the importance of not letting go because you give up, right? Not saying, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore because it's too hard, or because I can't do it, right? That's not an excuse, right? That's not a justification. But you can say, I'm letting go of that because I've found something better, right? I've found something that's more aligned with who I am. I've found something that is more meaningful to me. I found something that is, you know, a closer version of my values being expressed in the world. Then it's like, hi ho, let's go for it. All right, let's figure out how to do that. And so with that in mind, when we're looking into 2021, you know, we're entering into a new era, it seems now, on planet Earth in many ways. You know, the world is shifting, and trying to figure out what is our place in that, right? And one of the things to keep in mind when we think about our place in that is, the length of our time span, our priorities are big rocks, and what is the unique gift that we've been given to bring to planet Earth, right? This is, maybe I could call it I try not to hold on to too many beliefs anymore, but this is, I guess you could say, one of the beliefs that I still have is each human being has something very, very special about them. And I think in many ways, unfortunately, most people's gifts are not expressed, whether that's because they weren't given the encouragement or the confidence when they were young by their parents or by their educational system or society, or whether it's just that they lived in a time in history where it wasn't really that easy to be able to express those gifts, right? The thing about the modern world is that there's so many opportunities now. There's never been so many opportunities, but there's also never been so many distractions. And so it's trying to find the balance between those, right? Trying to find a place where we can find our ideal place on this planet, in this moment, at this point in history, the unique value that we can bring to this earth, and doing that in a way that is aligned with our values and aligned with what it is that the people around us are needing from us. And as far as I can see, the best way to do that is to kind of, it's like a touch and go, right? Like I see it, I see what I want, let me move towards it. And then I realize that the world is shifting around me. And now I need to let go of it a little while and sort of figure out, reorient myself to what's happening on planet Earth and say, okay, it's shifted a bit, it's changed a bit. I need to grab it in a different way now. I need to learn how to hold myself and hold the things around me in new ways. And if I can learn how to do that, it's living fully. It's living in my wholeness. It's living with my whole being, right? It's not just I come up with a plan, I come up with a vision, and then I race towards that no matter what, right? It's like, well, I have a vision, and then as the world shifts, I allow my vision to shift with it. And I'm still going, and I'm going fast towards where I want to go. And at the same time, I'm aware of how my environment is shifting around me. I'm aware of the needs of the people that are around me. Because I might have an amazing business vision for next year, but if one of my family gets sick, that goes out the window, right? And I make sure that I sort of, sit and stay and take care of the people that I care most about, if that's what the priority is at that time. Now, it may be that I can hold both those balls in the air at the same time. And if I can do that in a healthy way, making sure that I'm meeting my priorities, then fantastic, right? But we do want to make sure that we have room, we have space for shifting priorities. I know you've been through a big year this year with all sorts of different things. I'm wondering if that would be a useful experience to share a little bit about.
I think, look, I think let's go back. I mean, Jonathan is on the call with us, and he talks about the power of 9. And I think that's what you spoke about, is what are my 3 values? What are my 3 valiant, talents? And what are my 3 aspirations? And I mean, he uses 333, you and I, we all love the number of 3 anyway. And I think that's what you're speaking to, right? So, but the thing is that now that I've created that and I start moving towards it, right? First, how do I get the confidence or to that knowing when to kind of shift and not make it, I don't become, dependent on the weather, right? Because it's not, you don't want the economy to gauge and create your financial circumstance. It's you leveraging what is to build and create. And I'm not just talking about the business side, I'm talking family, I'm talking all of it, right? So it's the first thing I think we need to step back is to look at the basic foundation of my energy, right? What is my energy level, right? Now, of course, once I've ticked the boxes from the medical side, that I'm good to go, it's again, going back and saying, what am I feeding myself, right? That's my cash flow. That's, how is my nutrition and my choices that I'm making, right? Then from there, how am I processing it through the movement that I'm choosing to do, right? And then looking at my quality of sleep, right? Again, my gut health, my brain health, right? I think these are foundational pieces before I can even attempt to get to what you're referring to, which is the mental emotional element, right? Of of being able to be present is not being caught up in the thoughts and not being caught up in the emotion, right? So clarity is really, it's not a thought, it's clarity, it's beyond thought, right? And feeling is beyond emotion, right? So we're not talking about a washing machine or a hurricane or a volcano going on within, right? And from that space, then I move towards, like you say, the relationship, right? Beginning with self and then my loved one. So I think, it's people are probably listening and saying, wait a minute, these motions as if he's he's Bruce Lee and doing this kung fu rhythm, and it's true. It is. It's we and I, we prefer to use the term water, right? It's we always talk about, and I write about it in the book in terms of, the water takes the form it needs based on the circumstance. And that's what you need to do. But in all forms, in terms of energy also, I mean, you can be pumped up full of energy, but you can still be gentle, even though you have all those endorphins in your body, right? At the same time, you could deal with, like you said, a very challenging, family member who's not well, and showing up from that space, in my case, my own brother, and not bringing my experience to the situation as a comparative, because he's not me, I'm not him, right? I was 35, he's in his 50s. It's a complete, we're all different, right? So the thing is that, okay, so I've made the plan, like you said, I'm not attached to the plan, I'm adaptable, right? But then being careful that I'm not moving out of my plan based on the noise of the weather, which is the info and the data points, right? So how do I block out the noise? Now I do it because I don't even watch the news, but that's, for most people ridiculous, right? That means you're, checked out, living in La La Land, right? But, how do you learn to differentiate the noise from what is essential, right? Again, does it come with the knowing? Does it, because, how do we do that?
Yeah, beautiful question. There's a piece there that you said that really resonated, and it made me think about what it means to be embodied, right? Like you talked about health and being in our body and getting enough sleep and enough exercise and all of that, and then sort of like, well, how do we make sure that we're actually operating from that place? And particularly in the modern world, I don't know how many of you seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, but it's clear that these devices that we have are influencing us in so many ways, right? Some of them we may be relatively conscious of, and some of them seem to zip right past our consciousness, right? Like I've certainly been guilty of, falling prey to being addicted to certain types of applications, or, certain types of social media in certain ways. And I mean, even, there's that documentary, which is really fascinating, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, where it's like the people who designed these things, right, who sort of went to these top level universities to understand how to influence human, psychology, to be able to, create addictive experiences for people. Those people themselves who designed these things getting addicted to them, right? So it's not, awareness itself alone sometimes is not enough, right? And so it's like you mentioned earlier there that you don't watch the news. I fall into the same category. I don't watch the news, right? I haven't watched the news since I was a kid. And that was kind of just a conscious decision since I was young, because why? And I think partially for me, I was lucky in that I grew up around the world, right? Like I'm originally Irish, but I grew up in Africa and spent most of my life traveling around the world. And now I'm based in China. And one of the things I realized as a child in school was the history books are totally different depending on what school system you're in. So it's like, well, what's the true history, right? And that then made me sort of question. Then I'd sort of look at the TV and I'd see, CNN in one country and BBC in another country and CCTV in another country. And you're like, wait a minute, which news is true? Because they're all saying totally different things too. And so one of the things that I sort of kind of realized early on was, why am I allowing certain inputs into my mind? What are the inputs that I'm allowing to get in? because whether I like it or not, until the point where I become some sort of like a Zen Buddhist master, that I'm sort of in complete control of everything that's coming into my mind, right? Like whether I like it or not, the inputs are affecting me, right? If I'm consistently, pushing myself through content that has advertising blowing itself in my face, we've all seen the research around this. You walk down the store aisle, or you're sort of browsing through your phone or whatever, and you pick the things that are in your subconscious, and they're in your subconscious, right? Underneath your conscious. You're not consciously aware of it, right? And so, as much as possible, and I think this is really a huge area for humanity to figure out over the next few decades. How do we limit what is coming into our conscious awareness, right? Right now, we're giving our consciousness away for free, right? It's going onto the social media platforms, it's going onto the TV. It's even as we walk down the street, there's, billboards, and there's, I think very soon, I say very soon, in the next few decades, right? That's kind of long-term that I think, right? Very soon, the next few decades, we're going to start seeing like Google Glasses or something like that, where it literally shields you from all of that stuff, right? It's like you walk down the street and it like blocks out the billboards, right? It blocks out all the advertisements. The same way that you have like pop-up blockers or ad blockers on your internet browser, we're going to start creating that for our everyday lives, because advertising is everywhere. And advertising is just a symptom, right? The sort of the core basic fundamental part of it is the capitalist society that we live in. Which has brought many, many benefits to many, many societies. And, the fact that we've had economic growth, a lot of it is thanks to capitalism. And at the same time, there's some core fundamental flaws to the way in which we operate these societies. And, we haven't figured it out yet, right? We're a very young species when it comes to these things. We don't really have generational experience of what happens, when we have an entire generation of people who've grown up stuck to their phones, right? Who've grown up on social media, right? And, I think there's tremendous potential benefits to that, right? That we all are now interconnected on a global level, and we can have Zoom calls like this, where now, however many people can watch this and learn, right? There's lots of learning opportunities, lots of ways of becoming more aware. And at the same time, there's lots of influences that we may not be aware of that are happening all the time. And it's something that, we kind of have to, it's a great sort of piece to have in this call today, like uncertainty, right? We have no idea how much this is going to affect our next generation, right? What does it mean to have kids growing up on iPads and growing up with phones and growing up with, right? Like the internet generation, right? The social media generation, how do we know how much this is affecting us? And the reality is we don't. We can take scientific experiments and do, neuroscience analysis. And, we know there's certain trends that are going up, like teen suicides and all sorts of things, right? Or self-harm or these kinds of things. And there's other things that are going up, like, the average level of awareness at certain ages, that, actually, people are more aware of more things at younger ages now than they ever have been. They're more exposed to more different perspectives than they ever have been at younger ages, which allows them to be able to see things in more complex ways than any generation previous to them ever did. And at the same time, they seem to be missing certain types of capacities that were, clearly obvious in previous generations, whether that's knowing how to hit a baseball, right? Or whether that's sitting in front of another human being and knowing how to have a conversation that isn't, between a device. And so, yeah, I'm fascinated by this development on planet Earth right now. And I would say that, as, for those of us that are adults and we're trying to figure it out ourselves, to allow the space for what can emerge, right? And, I think it's very easy to get into the mindset of like, it's all going crazy and it's all too much and all this stuff is too, putting the bad filter on technology and saying, oh, it's all about technology, or it's all about capitalism, or it's all about this, or it's all about that. And the reality is that, look, these are all just different phenomena. They're all different phenomena that are happening in different ways. And we can put whatever sort of a story on top of it that we want. But the reality is that each one of these things offers an opportunity. And so how can we see each of those different phenomena as an opportunity to live in more awareness, to live in more conscious ways. And that's a frame that I've personally found really useful. And it's something that I kind of often try to lead my clients towards. It's like, look, anything, we can put a negative story on anything, right? And to a certain, you'll find truth in it, right? There's truth in all types of stories, right? And at the same time, the question is, which stories are useful, right? Is it helping you to think that right now? Is it helping you to have a negative view about the world or the way things are going or whatever? Or if we perhaps change that a little bit and we said, well, what would it be like to have the kind of future that we wanted to have on planet Earth, right? What would it be like to have the planet that was the planet we wanted to live on, right? Now let's figure out how we can create that, right? And now we're directing attention towards the kind of world that we want to live in, the kind of technology we want to be interacting with, the kind of relationships we want to have. And if we can do that, if more and more of us can do that, then we can all start to wake up a little bit more. We can all start to be in more awareness. We can all start to make more conscious decisions. And that excites me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to ask anyone who has questions to please type in. We'd love to hear what are some of the things that you'd like us to share on. What I like to do is just kind of, we've done over 40 something webinars, and I think let's look at what could be in a form spring cleaning as well as in a form preparation, right? So we talked about the power of 9. Jonathan did a webinar on the power of a 9, which you talked about, right? Values, talents, inspiration, right? Aspiration, sorry. Then we talked about, in terms of, the emotional side, right? So Kathleen did one on the scale of emotion, right? You talked about that person who was sad versus depressed, kind of maybe do a check-in and see, where am I right now, right? On that scale. It's not about good, bad. It's just kind of knowing, where have I been throughout the year? And how would I like to choose differently maybe for the year to come? Then kind of move, maybe look at, Dr. D did a one on mind-body access, right? Kind of relook at, where, how am I showing up, right? And looking at, and maybe doing some of the meditations that he shared on and ask some of those questions, right? Then, of course, we did those on communication and relationships, right? Again, when we talked about how am I, in terms of the gentleness, what would love do now, right? And coming from that space, right, of love and kindness, but again, need to take it first towards ourselves, right? Many of us would not treat our worst enemy as we treat ourselves, right? Which is really sad, but a reality. I mean, I was one of them pre-cancer. I don't know how much I've improved, but anyway, that's a story for another time, right? So the thing is that, I'd like to offer everyone to kind of, make the most of, it's not because there are webinars, it's just kind of, let's look at where were we throughout the year, right? And celebrate, honor, acknowledge, right? Be grateful for the simple things and the big things, and our ability to have endured or embraced or accepted, right? What has, and say, what are the lessons that I can bring to next year, right? Because next year and every year is going to be the unexpected, right? And the reality is that, we talk about an acceleration. We all know this acceleration is going to continue at a pace that we can't even imagine, right? So it's not that there's going to be a deceleration, but it might be a deceleration from your perspective based on the meaning you give to what goes around, right? So it's going to accelerate or decelerate depend on my meaning, right? And whether I resist it, I embrace it, I accept it or not, right? So I think that's something that I would encourage, right? We're going to take probably a 4-week break, and let's take the time to, take stock, right? But from a physical, mental, emotional, relational perspective, and of course, also from the business side and all of those angles, and then look at how would we like to choose differently? How do I want to show up differently? Or maybe the same, if it worked, in an incredible manner, maybe you want to do more of the same and make that your default setting, right? So that you can come from that space, right? Any other suggestions? I mean, obviously we've got, the meditations and all of that. Any other suggestions to do both the spring cleaning and kind of the planning. And I guess everybody is either quiet or thinks we're not worth asking questions to. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, with the spring cleaning, one of the things that I often do like a yearly review with some of my coaching clients, just to sort of see how things are going and how they'd like to plan for the next year, and to really reflect on how the year went. And you mentioned earlier the celebrating, to really take the time to celebrate. I mean, we have the whole kind of like Christmas, New Year's, depending on your, your belief system or your tradition or your cultural sort of, background. There's this end of year and beginning of year in pretty much every culture. And taking the time to really celebrate, right? Like, I've made it to the end of the year, right? Like, one, I'm just alive still, like I'm surviving, right? Like, that's one, an accomplishment, and one, just something to be incredibly grateful for, right? Like, out of the, however, I don't even know, I should know the number, millions of sperm, that reached the egg, that fertilized me, that made me into a human being, right? Like, I wasn't one of the other ones that didn't make it, right? Like, I'm a miracle. Just being alive, I'm a miracle. And to stay alive is a miracle. And so just to get to the end of the year and be like, wow, like, look back at all I've done, all I've accomplished, all I've achieved, all I've lived, all the relationships I've had, and just really sort of gasping at the beauty of what it is to be a human being, seeing all of the beautiful things that have happened to us. Right now, we can sort of fixate and focus on, some of the traumas that we've had in our life, and not to say there isn't a place for and time for doing that, right? Like, that's obviously some of the work that I do as well, but to really just marvel at, how amazing it is to be alive right now at this point in history also, like how many privileges we have that are built on our ancestors, the fact that we have technology or, heating or modern dentistry, so our teeth aren't all falling out at the age of 30, right? And just to say, wow, like, look how amazing in so many ways my life has been, is going to be as well, potentially, right? And so starting from that place where if we can sit on a bed of gratitude, having that foundation, right? And now say, now let me look into the future, right? Let me see how much I have been given, right? I've been given by my parents, given by my ancestors, given by planet Earth as a whole, right? This juicy, wonderful Mother Nature that has birthed us all, right? This universe in which we seem to have popped out of being aware, right? How can I look at that and be grateful for all of that that has come, to acknowledge the things that I've also been able to manifest out into my life, that I've been able to create. Humans are creationary beings. We make things, we create things that are entirely new, and that's of the benefit of generations that are to come. And so then from that mindset, then to go forward and to look into the next year, right? And, we've all done the sort of the New Year's resolution thing. And I'm, not a huge fan of sort of creating a few things that I'm, going to do great in January and then not going to do for the rest of the year and then try and do it again next year, right? It's about saying, like, let me, if there's even just one thing this year, right? One thing that is important for me to do, right? One thing that I would really like to focus on, right? What is that one thing, right? And the other things we can sort of fit in around it, right? Not to forget them completely, but like, what is it that is the priority? What is it that matters most? And then to go through that process of really, mapping it out and creating the space in your life, in your awareness, with the resources that you might have or could create in order to make that a reality. And then we can step into the new year being able to let go of, what has come, but be grateful for, everything that has brought us to this point, and to open up, into the new year with fresh eyes and be able to experience it in all of its fullness.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from that space saying, how do we build up the muscle to do this more often? Trying to surface it only in the time of a new year isn't a positive process for me. And look, the idea obviously is, like we talk about when we speak, is we're looking at building the physical muscle, then building the mental muscle, building the emotional muscle, and building the relational muscle. And I think that's what, she's speaking to. The thing is that, the idea is that it's a creation of habit, right? Creating that habit, whether it's a weekly review. When I trained with Robin, we looked at the big 5 for life. We looked at the values. We looked at how we're actually living those values on a daily basis, weekly basis, right? And a monthly basis. And what are we going to do to live, walk, and talk those values? And how am I moving the needle towards the big 5? In this case, could be the 3 aspirations, or how to build those talents, or how to continue to live in those values. So it's really about creating a habit. You know, whether, to me, I mean, we had an A3 chart that kind of tracked the weekly you know, process, and then we did a weekly review, and then we had a quarterly, monthly review, and a quarterly. Of course, that's a very, you know, very tactical way of approaching it, right? But at the same time, you know, that's how we build the muscle, right? Just like we go to the gym, by creating a habit so that it's easier to do than not to do. All right. Yeah. So we're at the end of our time. Anything else you'd like to share as a closing remark, Fionn, before we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll reiterate just quickly what you said there with, you know, making things simple, creating simple routines, rituals, right? Like you talk about, oh, this big yearly thing. It's like, well, what do you do every day, right? Like just look at your daily routine, right? What do you do when you wake up in the morning, right? And what's something small? Because habits stack. We can stack habits on other, you know, habits. And there's that wonderful book, Atomic Habits, which, you know, talks about the 1% rule, right? Like just make things 1% better every day. Yeah. You don't have to jump 10%. 10% jump is really hard, right? And you're probably going to fail, right? Because afterwards, you know, you got to, you know, reacclimate. But if you can just do 1%, 1%, 1%, that actually becomes an exponential curve. So to take small steps consistently can sometimes be the biggest step of all. Yeah, I'll just leave with that. I'm really grateful for everyone who's come here today to join us. And I hope you enjoyed the chat. I really enjoyed chatting with you here, Feisal. And looking forward to you know, the new year, and wishing you all a wonderful end of year, and hoping that you have a wonderful experience, and start off the new year in a beautiful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Fionn. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the honor and privilege to be here today. Thank you, everyone, as always, for really giving us the honor and privilege of your presence, for giving us the opportunity to share from our hearts of whatever's coming up in the different topics that we care for. We're going to take a little break over the next 4 weeks, but I would really encourage you to kind of take the opportunity, whether it's our webinars or others, to really look at, you know, consider the power of 9, consider communication, consider the relationships, consider the emotion, consider the mind-body access. Relook at, we talked about beliefs and patterns. We touched on a lot of topics today that are all have their own webinars from our space, whether it's Robin, whether it's Shafali, whether it's Joe Dispenza, whether it's, you know, whoever connects with you. I'd really encourage you over the next 3 to 4 weeks to really step back, acknowledge, celebrate, be in gratitude, you know, kind of review what worked, what didn't work. And I don't mean it from a left brain male perspective, right? And you know, be fully present as Jonathan, you know, Fionn talked about, and of course, Jonathan keeps coming in my head. So thank you, Jonathan, for disrupting my flow. But so again, thank you, everyone. Truly appreciate it. Really an honor and privilege. This wouldn't be possible without all of you. I'm really grateful, and hope to see you all in the new year. And some of you I'll be seeing in Dubai very soon, and others in Hong Kong once I make it back home, sweet home. All right. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Feisal, for holding space.
Thank you, Fionn. Thank you. Thank you.